Hello and welcome to a quick Python tutorial on something that is so very helpful. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about functions. And functions are fantastic in Python, especially when you feel like you're going to have a snippet of code that you need to reuse several times or actions that you think you might need to repeat on a regular basis. It's just a way of very quickly accessing that code without having to do it over and over again or without having to copy and paste. So let's just jump right in and talk about functions. So for those of you that are coming over from the world of Excel, the good news is you've been writing functions forever, right? So let's just look at Excel for just a second. So when I pop into Excel, there are so many different functions that we all know and love in Excel, right? So let's just look at something really simple like the sum function. So I could write a function in Excel pretty quickly, which is the sum function. If I take a peek at it, it's pretty simple structure, right? So I've got the name of the function, then I've got these arguments that I've passed into the function, right? So A1 and A2 are the arguments that I need to enter in order to get a specific value coming out of that sum function. And when I do that, it tells me 4. So now if we think about functions a little bit, they're basically just pre-built in directions that you can call without having to type those directions over and over again. So every function that you know of in Excel, right? So if I go to formulas and I look at all these different functions under all these different categories, these are all just pre-built in. So somebody took the time to type out how to do this mathematically, and then they just assigned a function name to it. So instead of having to type out exactly how to do the math here, for example, how to do an average, instead you can simply call the average function, pass in specific arguments, and it will do the math for you. Okay, so I would assume that most people understand how to use a function. What's so cool about Python is that not only can you use functions, you can actually make your own functions. And that's what I want to show you how to do today. So I'm going to show you how to make your own functions and how to call those functions. And I'll show you 3 different options. Functions with no parameters, functions with 1 parameter, and functions with multiple parameters. So let's just go ahead and open up an instance of Jupyter Notebook. And if you happen to be in class with me, I make all these notebooks available via Canvas. If you are not in class with me and you've just fumbled across this, just looking to learn more about Python, hey, welcome. Thanks for coming by. Hopefully I can help you out a little bit because everybody is constantly learning and it's just a good skill to have. So let's just jump right in and talk about functions. So the first thing you want to know when you're creating a function in Python is that you have to call the function or create the function by using the keyword def. And we're going to give the function a name. So I'm going to do something really simple here. We'll just call this welcome. So this is called the welcome function. And what this function is going to do is if we run it, it's going to literally say hello and welcome. Okay. So the first thing you'll want to notice is I've given the function a name. So first I've said def, which says I'm defining a function. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give the function a name. So where I've said welcome here, and that is case sensitive, that is a function. That's the name of the function. So then next to that, I've got these left, right parentheses. Now, if I had parameters that I was going to pass into this function, I would put those parameters here. But because this will be the first time we use this function or the first example that I'm going to give you, which is going to be a function with no parameters, I'm simply going to leave this space in here blank. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to end that first line of the function by typing a colon like so. Okay. So now I'm going to hit return. Notice that it indented when I did. Okay. So I did def for defining a function, the name of the function with no parameters, and then I've completed that with a colon. Okay. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to hit return. That indents the line, and I'm just going to print. So I'm going to say we want it to print hello and welcome. That's all we want it to do. Okay. So what this function does is if I call the welcome function, it's literally just going to print hello and welcome. So let's look at it and you'll see it happen. Okay. So I've run the function first. And now that I've run the function, I can actually call the function. So now when you call the function, right? So when you create a function, it doesn't do anything on its own. You have to call it in order for it to execute. Just like in Excel, you had to actually type a function in and then pass in arguments in order to make it work. So I've created the function here. Now I'm going to call the function on this next line, this next cell in the Jupyter Notebook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type welcome. And I've just got left, right parentheses. So there's no argument that I pass in. And I simply run it. And look at that. It's just going to tell me hello and welcome. Okay. So this is an example of a function that doesn't have any required arguments. So you don't have to give it anything. It will just execute something. It'll repeat something if you call it. That is not too far different from something like the today function in Excel. So for example, in Excel, if I use the today function, notice that there are no arguments for me to pass in here. So I simply go today, and it passes everything in. So it just automatically does it. There's nothing that I needed to pass in there. So that's the first kind of function example that I wanted to give you. Okay, so a function that has no required arguments. It just does its thing. Whatever we want it to do, it will do. And in this case, I told it, right, after I gave it the name welcome, and I told it it doesn't have any parameters, the next thing I did was I said, hey, when it executes, print this line. So that's the first example of a function that I wanted to give you. Okay, so every time I do this, it gives me the ability to reuse that print code without actually having to type the print code. Okay, so the next example I wanted to give you is going to be a little spin-off of what we just did. So I want to show you what it looks like to create a function that has parameters. And you'll hear people say parameter and you'll hear people say arguments. They're sort of one and the same. The difference is where you're putting them in. Are you entering it when you're defining the name of the function, or are you actually passing it in when you're calling the function? But ultimately, it's the value that you need to give the function in order to make it work. Now, the best way to understand this is to just do it. So here's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go def again, and I'm going to call this one welcome to. Okay. So I'm going to create a new function by using the keyword def. Giving the function a name, which in this case, it's going to be welcome to. And this time I'm going to do something different. So inside these parentheses, instead of leaving it blank, meaning that I don't have to give the function anything in order for it to run, this time I'm going to say that in order for it to run, you need to enter a name. Okay. So I'm saying, hey, in order for this function to run, we need to enter a name. Okay. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run that print again, but we're going to modify the print. Okay. So we're going to go print, and we're going to use our super handy F string. Okay, so I'm going to go print, and this time we're going to go hello and welcome, and we're going to use those curly brackets because that's how F string works. And we're going to say name, right curly brackets. Now, if you're confused on how F string works, if you've not seen this before, I've got a video on F string. You should definitely go back and check it out. So now what this is going to do is when you call this function, it's gonna have you put your name in, right? So you're gonna have to pass your name in to this function in order for it to execute. Now, when you do, it's gonna say hello and welcome and your name instead of just saying hello and welcome. So first I gotta run it. Okay, now I'm gonna call it. So I'll say welcome. And this time we're gonna go welcome to. And I'm gonna pass in my name. And now when I run it, it's gonna say hello and welcome with my name. So now this is an example of a function that has one parameter when you've defined it, right? So name is the parameter. And then when I go and call it, it says, hey, give me the argument or give me something that I'm going to actually spit back to you. And that's what my name is. So here it's saying, hey, the function requires one thing. It requires a name. Okay. When you give it the name, it's going to perform the print action. And we used F string here. So we're able to pass in the variable of name in curly brackets. Then the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go and call the function, and then we're going to actually give it the value that we want it to return, and that's going to be my name, Jason. So it says hello and welcome, Jason. Okay, so functions, super helpful. But I want to give you one more. There's virtually no limit to the number of parameters that you can set when you define a function. And on top of that, functions can do more than just print. They can actually perform mathematic calculations as well, right? So just think the sum function or the average function in Excel. So I want to give you another example of some things you can do. Let's get something a little bit more interesting. So let's talk about purchasing homes. Okay. So a couple key performance indicators when you talk about people in the housing market is you'll hear a lot of people talk about the list price versus the selling price. So the list price, if you're going to buy a house, is what the house is being sold for, but the selling price is what the house actually sold for. So the percent of list price is a good metric on how well you did selling that house, right? Did you sell it for 100% of the ask? Did you sell it for 20% of the ask? Well, we know that we could figure that out by simply dividing, right? So we could take the purchase price of the house, and divide the purchase price by the list price. And that's going to tell you the percentage of the sale, right? So how much of this was actually covered? What percentage of the ask was actually recouped with the actual purchase? Okay, so we know we can do that math. But instead of doing the math, we could create a function that would do the math for you, just like the average function in Excel or the sum function in Excel or the product function. It just does the math for you if you calculate it one time. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So in this particular case, we're going to say def, right? So we're going to use the keyword def, which shows up in blue, and that says that we're going to define a function. We're going to create a new function that'll do something for us. It'll give us the ability to reuse code. Now in this case, we're going to call this percent of ask. Okay, so what percentage of the ask was the actual sell of the house? So percent of ask is the name of the function. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pass in, or not pass in, we're going to create two required values that have to go into this. So one is going to be the purchase price, and the second one is going to be the list price. Okay, so these become the arguments of the percent of ask function. Okay, so in order to make it work, you're going to have to give it two values. One will be purchase price and one will be list price. Okay, so once we go in and we define the name of the function and the parameters, we're going to hit colon and then we're going to return. So now we're going to do something a little different here. So we want this to do some math for us. And there's a couple different ways you can do it and you can get creative, but just to make it easy for you guys, I'm going to do this. I'm going to declare a variable inside here called results. And what I'm going to say is the results are the equivalent of the purchase price divided by the list price, which we know will tell us the percent of ask. How much did we actually recover? Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say list price. Yep. So I'm going to hit return. So what I'm going to do after I declare that, hey, results is it's the purchase price divided by list price, I'm then going to say, hey, I want it to return something. So instead of printing, I want it to actually return a value instead. So what I'm going to say is return, and I'm going to say return, which I need to spell return correctly, return results, like so. Okay, so we want it to return the results of purchase price divided by list price. Excuse me. So when I hit enter, I've created that function like so. So the last thing I need to do here is I need to call that function and then give it two values in order to evaluate. So what I'm going to say is percent of ask. And just like Excel, all I now have to do, I don't have to do the math anymore, right? All I need to do is give it the two different numbers. So let's say that the purchase price, so say we have a $450,000 house. That's what we bought it for. Okay, we bought it for $450,000. However, let's say that they were asking $500,000. Okay, so we wanted $500,000, we got $450,000, so we were $50,000 short. What that's going to tell us is, hey, look at this. The house sold for 90% of ask. It's that simple. So I didn't want this to take too long. Practice makes perfect with Python functions, but what I will tell you is they are so helpful and can save you so much time. Yes, it will take a little bit of time up front to write the function and think about how you want it to work, but knowing that you're going to redo something or reuse it over and over and over again, that's where the true value or the return on the investment of creating the functions in Python really, really helps out. So I do want to give a quick summary of what we talked about just to make sure you understand, because this can get a little confusing when you get into it. So let's just go back and look really quickly at what we did, and then I'll get you out of here. So I talked you through creating functions in Python. I showed you three different examples: a function that has no parameters, a function that has one parameter, and a function that has two parameters. Okay, so the first example I gave you, we used the keyword def to define a function. We gave the function the name welcome, and we said, hey, there's nothing you have to give it in order for it to run. That's why these parentheses are empty. We've concluded that initial statement with a colon, and then we just tell it what to do, just like you would in Python. So if we just wanted to print hello, that's what it would say. So there's example one. When you execute it, this is the result. Okay. So example two was a function that has one value that you have to give it in order to execute. So in this particular case, we created a new function called welcome to, and the function now requires you to give it a name. Once you give it a name, it's going to print and it's going to say your name. Okay. So when we call it down here, it says hello and welcome Jason. And then lastly, we did a little bit of math with a function, just like those cool mathematic functions that you can call in Excel. So in this particular case, we created a function that can tell you percent of asking price of a house. And in this case, we said the purchase price and list price had to be defined up front. So you had to give those to the function in order for it to work. Once it does it, it's going to divide purchase price by list price, and it's going to return the results. We then tested it, and you got 90%. Just like that, short and sweet. So with that, my friends, I will let you go. I hope that this helped you out. If so, do like what those young kids say. Please like and subscribe and show me some love. I really appreciate you guys checking these out, and I really enjoy doing them for you. So I'm always taking requests. If you have questions, please let me know. For those of you that are in class with me, I will see you on Tuesday, and I hope you guys all have a happy and safe weekend.